While in Rome, our new PM meets with U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance. Mark Carney also suspends counter tariffs despite saying he wouldn't. And StatsCan reporting the inflation rate drops, but the reason might be surprising to some. Here to unpack it all is political commentator and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley. Brian, hello.
Hi, good to see you again.
You as well. Okay, so let's start with that last one, shall we? So Statistics Canada says the inflation rate dropped in April, and the reason is the consumer carbon tax was dropped. But Brian, didn't the Liberal government spend years saying that there was no relation between the inflation and the consumer carbon tax?
Oh, they told you you were going to be better off. You'd be richer. You'd be richer, Jeanette, because of the carbon tax. We're all so much richer because we're paying more. Look, it was a matter of dispute for the Trudeau government. Mark Carney, now the Prime Minister, leading the same Liberal government that Justin Trudeau led, had also defended the carbon tax against it being inflationary. The only reason, of course, that Mark Carney got rid of the carbon tax, well, it didn't get rid of it yet. He says he will once Parliament resumes, but he reduced the rate to zero, was because he said it had become too divisive. But we all knew that adding costs onto fuel, that was going to increase the price of goods. And we saw that over the years. Now, the inflation rate in March was 2.3%. The inflation rate in April dropped to 1.7%. And it's not me saying that this was partly due to the carbon tax dropping. It was Statistics Canada saying that. Now, we also know that right at the beginning of April, of course, we had what Donald Trump called Liberation Day, imposing taxes around the world. That created a lot of market chaos. I don't have to tell anyone based in Alberta what that did to the price of oil, a precipitous drop, causing problems for your provincial economy and provincial budget. But all of that to say that part of the drop was due to the consumer carbon tax being dropped to zero on April 1st. Now, food inflation is still up at about 3.8%. That is much higher than it is in the United States. We'll have to see if that comes down in the future, because we do know that the carbon tax had an impact on the price of food, the price of just about everything. But dropping it in the month of April clearly had an impact on the inflation rate, despite years of the Trudeau government telling us, no, don't believe your lying eyes. This is good for you.
And speaking of money, Mark Carney reversed course over the weekend and announced that there will be a budget this year, that there actually will be one, but not until the fall. So why the change of heart and why the wait, Brian?
So, I mean, this was really interesting. PM Carney announced his cabinet on Wednesday. There was the good, there was the bad, there was the ugly. People gave their different reviews of it. But there's a lot of positive reviews of the cabinet. Maybe not from me, but some others. And Francois Philippe Champagne is the new finance minister. And he comes out on Thursday, the first cabinet meeting, and tells reporters, they're asking him, well, when will the budget be? And he's like, oh, no, we're gonna bring in the middle tax cut. We're gonna have the speech from the throne, and then we'll have a fall economic statement. What? No budget? No, we'll have a fall economic statement. And so it was like that from Thursday until the weekend, when Prime Minister Carney's in Rome speaking to reporters, and he gets asked about this, and he changes his tune. So he left it for several days. As I say in my column, he allowed Frankie Bubbles, which is my nickname for the finance minister, he allowed Frankie Bubbles' exuberance to spill over for days, with everyone thinking there was no budget. This isn't good for the economy. It's not good for our credit rating. And then Mark Carney had to put a cork in it and clean up on aisle 3. He came out and said, no, we're going to have a budget, but it will be in the fall. Now, look, I think they could still do a budget this spring. The finance department is filled with highly skilled people who would be able to go out there and do the right thing, come up with a budget, come up with it quickly. The reason that they won't is political. But when pressed, Prime Minister Carney did come up with some valid reasons for why putting it off to the fall is a good idea. So, got to give credit where credit is due. You got to criticize when they need it and give credit when they need it. So when asked, well, why not this spring? He said, first off, the House is scheduled to rise on June 20th. Now, they could sit into the summer. That's absolutely correct. But the NATO summit is on June 23rd and 24th. And that's going to have an impact as Carney correctly pointed out, on the Canadian budget, because there's going to be a lot of pressure on Canada to spend more on defense. Then he said there's the ongoing talks with the Americans surrounding tariffs and the economic relationship. What kind of impact will that have? The Americans are ready to deal. They're ready to talk to us. They say it's up to us. So that could have an impact on the budget. Why bring out a budget and then sign a deal with the Americans? And then thirdly, he said they're going to be looking over the summer for efficiencies in government, trying to make the public service, which has ballooned under the Liberals dramatically, up 40%. They're going to be looking for ways to make them more productive, more efficient, and find savings. You put all that together and you say, okay, waiting a few months from the election is acceptable. That has happened under previous prime ministers, Liberal and Conservative. But saying that we didn't need a budget until next year, that was completely unacceptable. So a compromise, meet in the middle, sometime late September, early October, a budget will come out.
All right. Okay. You mentioned cleanup aisle 3. It looked like Carney also had to do some cleanup aisle 5 this time after his newly appointed housing minister said that housing prices didn't need to come down. But the PM didn't exactly say prices need to drop either. He only hinted at it. So what can you tell us here, Brian?
Well, so look, what is the problem with housing affordability? Houses cost too much. The government's kind of caught in a pickle. They were just elected by people mainly over 55, people in the boomer cohort who were worried about the value of their assets, their retirement savings, and their home, which is everyone's biggest purchase, their biggest asset, right? For most of us, that is our biggest asset. And that cohort is worried about, what do you mean prices have to drop? This is my nest egg. I can't afford for the home that I paid $75,000 for to drop from 1 million down to 869,000. I need that money to retire. And so they don't want the prices to go down. But if prices don't go down, can someone living in Vancouver, in Toronto, in Calgary, in Edmonton, can young people who are priced out of the market afford to buy in? Well, not necessarily. And so Gregor Robertson, the former mayor of Vancouver, who oversaw a dramatic increase in the price of housing while he was mayor. And of course, municipalities have the greatest responsibility for housing and housing policy and driving up the cost through development charges. He just said, no, we don't need to see housing prices come down. Carney came out and he said, we've got to look at the whole thing, affordability prices. You don't necessarily want people's existing homes coming down, but can we find ways to make it more affordable for young people? So he's trying to thread the needle. He's trying to play both sides. This was not a great moment for his government, neither Gregor Robertson's comments nor his attempt at cleanup. It is just one of many cleanups that they've had to do over the past couple of weeks. And it's a bit of a mess out there.
Yeah, no, exactly. Okay, Brian, it was revealed last week that despite saying he was using counter tariffs to execute maximum pain on Americans, which in reality actually inflicts pain on Canadians. So the Carney government then approved eliminating or suspending most tariffs on April 16th, and that move took effect on May the 7th. So that move doesn't seem to match the elbows up rhetoric the Liberals used in the campaign.
Elbows
now,
up.
does it?
Elbows up, right? I mean, this is what we heard all through the election. And yet 12 days before voting day, the Carney government moved to either reduce, eliminate, or suspend tariffs on 97% of goods that were going to be tariffed. So, we've effectively got our tariff rate at 0, which is what the Americans wanted. And yet all through the campaign, so the April 16th, by the way, I want to point out that was the date before the French debate. April 18th was the English debate. Mark Carney didn't talk about that there. He talked about the same thing, imposing maximum pain on the Americans. You rightly point out it imposes pain on Canadians. But this was the rhetoric that he talked about. Now, he did make a mention of we're moving off dollar for dollar tariffs. And some Liberals are saying, see, well, no, he said it during the election. You guys just didn't catch it. No, that is something completely different. We were never going dollar for dollar under the Trudeau plan nor the Carney plan. So don't be too cute by half. You guys said one thing. You said elbows up. You said inflict pain on the Americans, but not Canadians. And then you lowered them. And guess when they took effect? The day after Mark Carney went to the White House. So, you see that picture of the Carney and Trump standing side by side with the thumbs up, did Mark Carney just tell him, "Hey, Donald, we got rid of all your tariffs"? Voters were had. They were absolutely had because this guy sold one thing and delivered something else.
Yeah, it's interesting that nobody's really talking about that either. And then speaking of Carney with the Americans, so he was in the Vatican for the inaugural Mass of Pope Leo XIV. And while there, he held various meetings, including with U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance. But weren't we told that meeting with people like Vance was not acceptable?
Oh, conservative MP Jamil Javani, who is uh, old friends with JD Vance. They went to Yale Law School together. Jamil Javani was in Vance's wedding party, or I don't know if he was in the wedding party
Mm.
or he did a reading at the wedding. Uh, he's been asked to denounce his longtime friend.
Hmm.
He has been on the record as saying, "Look, I've told him don't come visit right now. It's not good. It wouldn't be good for us.
Optics,
Wouldn't be
I
good for me
guess.
politically."
Right.
And yet there is Mark Carney sitting down talking with JD Vance at the on the sidelines of Pope Leo XIV's inaugural mass. Now I'll say this: both men are Catholics who take their faith seriously. Mark Carney is definitely on the left wing, not just politically, but from a religious, philosophical point of view. JD Vance is from the conservative side, but they would still have an awful lot in common. So my guess is a lot of the conversation revolved around that, but also politics as well. But why is it okay for uh, Mark Carney to go thumbs up with Donald Trump, to meet with JD Vance, to lower the tariffs, while going around saying that you can't elect Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives because he'll kneel before Donald Trump and the MAGA crowd? What are you doing, Mark Carney? Like you're doing what you're accusing the others of. What's that old saying? When you're pointing your finger at someone, you got three pointing back at you.
Yeah,
Hello,
exactly.
Mark.
All right. A joint statement by the leaders of Canada, France, and the UK is being criticized right now after it received praise and a thank you from the terrorist group Hamas. So, Brian, I believe the countries are condemning Israel for blocking aid. So, what happened there?
Yeah, they're saying that Israel is blocking aid, which Israel disputes. They're also saying that Israel is going too far in terms of how it's handling its military operations in Gaza in response to the fact that Hamas has not returned all the hostages, will not surrender, continues to attack Israel. Israel just has a far superior military. And so it's a bit of a one-sided war, absolutely. But if it's a one-sided war and one side is losing badly, maybe the folks leading that should surrender. That is not the focus of the message from Mark Carney, Prime Minister of Canada, Keir Starmer, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, or Emmanuel Macron, the President of the French Republic. So the three of them got together, put out a statement, and there's a brief mention of returning the hostages, but most of it is about denouncing Israel. I'm sorry, but Israel did not start this war. Israel would give up this war tomorrow if the hostages were returned and Hamas surrendered. Hamas will not do that. I'll give the Carney government credit. They have said that Hamas cannot be part of the future of Gaza. That should be a no-brainer for anyone. But even that is not really the focus of their statement. Their statement was to showcase to the progressive world that they're on side with them in denouncing Israel, our democratic ally. We're very concerned about what the United States is saying about Canada right now and saying, well, wait a minute, you're our ally. Why are you saying these things? And then we turn around and we put out a statement that denounces our democratic ally in the Middle East and is so one-sided that Hamas says, oh yeah, this is a good statement. If a listed banned terrorist organization is praising your statement, maybe you want to reconsider your choice of words.
Brian Lilley, political columnist with the Toronto Sun. Thanks so much for joining us today. Appreciate having you on as always.
Thanks for having me.